All right. Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Authors Guild Foundation series From Manuscript to Marketplace. Today with Priyanka Champaneri, the author of The City of Good Death, also her agent Lee Feldman, and Nathan Rostron, editor and marketing director of Restless Books. In this series, we get a behind-the-scenes look at the path to publication, hearing from an author of a recent book with members of their publishing team about acquisition, editorial, marketing, anything interesting that they can speak to that our audience of writers might want to hear about. And I'd like to say the series is funded in part by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of Kathy Hochul and the New York State Legislature. Thank you to them and all our supporters. Each of these events is a little different. On Friday, we have one with the YA book by Micah and Maritza Melite, sisters and co-authors. So they'll talk about the collaborative process. Today, we have an author, agent, and editor. So there's a lot to talk about. So just want to say thank you to our panelists for joining us today. To those in the audience, please know that today's panelists are gracing us with their time to share their knowledge and insights. Please be courteous and respectful, and do not solicit them with personal requests for feedback or manuscript submissions, as they might not be able to accommodate. Please use the Q&A if you'd like to hear from our panelists, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. Thank you. So Priyanka, Nathan, Lee, thanks for being here. Priyanka, let's start with you telling us a little about the book, and then after that, maybe we'll hear from Lee and why she wanted to represent it. And then, the rest of the story of the City of Good Death.
Yeah, fantastic. Johnny, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you to the Authors Guild for hosting us. Thank you everybody watching for spending time with us. And the biggest thank you to Lee and Nathan, two of my favorite people. This is a treat for me to be able to talk to both of you for an hour. So I thought I would start off really quickly, just talking about how the book developed from the beginning up until the point where I got to connect with Lee. So I went to a 3-year MFA program at George Mason University. In my last year, I had to work on a thesis project, and the project I chose was the book that would end up becoming The City of Good Death. I graduated in 2010. I got a full-time job. And from there, it was just working on the manuscript constantly in the evenings and on weekends. And it took about 5 to 6 years before I got it to a place that I thought was good enough to start showing to agents. So I started that whole querying for agents process, and it was totally old school. I didn't know anybody. I had no connections. I just Googled, how do you write a query letter? And I kind of followed the form that I saw. And I looked to my bookshelf because I am, like many of you out there, an absolute 100% lifetime reader. So I looked at my favorite contemporary fiction, and I flipped to the back of those books to the acknowledgements. And I looked to see who those writers thanked as their agent in deciding who to query. And one of those books that I looked at was Memoirs of a Geisha. And one of those agents was Lee Feldman. And so we ended up connecting through me just blind querying her. And I got a great response back in terms of wanting to see a partial of the manuscript, sent that. A couple weeks later, wanting to see the full manuscript, sent that. And we just ended up connecting from there. And for my part, I think I really, really became Team Lee Feldman because she was so unabashedly enthusiastic about the book from the very, very get-go. She just loved it so much, and she got it just on that visceral level that I wanted a reader to get it on. But more than that, in terms of connecting with Lee and deciding I really, really wanted to work with her and have her represent me, it was also because Lee had all of the qualities that I thought I was deficient in myself, which is, number one, she's so highly respected in the industry. And she has just built so many incredible relationships with folks in the publishing industry. But also she is savvy, she's tenacious, and she is, she's affirmative. If she's going after something, she's gonna go after it with her full heart. And so I wanted that. I saw her as a perfect companion in terms of trying to get this book out there to a wider audience. So Lee, I think this is probably a good time for me to pass the baton over to you and just, I don't know, talk about like what you really liked about the book or why you decided you wanted to represent it.
Thank you. That was a lovely introduction from Johnny and from Priyanka. First of all, it's not really a blind query when an author has done their homework and said, I read a book you represented, I loved it, and I thought you might like my particular book as a result. And that always resonates with us, with agents. It shows that you've done your homework and you know that I'm not representing fantasy or, a genre fiction. And we respond very much to that. That makes a big difference when you look at hundreds of queries a week and one person has done their homework. So automatically that sort of raises that query level to the top. I have always been drawn, I'm an armchair adventurist and historian, and I've always been drawn to stories about worlds that I am completely unfamiliar with, that are translated in a narrative way for the layperson, so that I don't have to read a history book about the story of Hindu death and the city of good death, Varanasi in this case. And I was blown away by how much I was able to learn just through story and narrative. And that to me is one of the most appealing reasons to take on a book. Also, you are a very, very good writer. That's first and foremost. You tell an amazing story. And I loved your characters. The first scene, there's so many scenes that are memorable, but the first scene in particular is absolutely haunting. And I was drawn in from there. So that's the story of deciding to want to represent it. We also have conversations. In the case of your book, I was working with a fabulous editorial colleague named Alana Masad. I'm sorry she can't be with us today, but Alana and I both read, both discuss at length, and then we talk to an author and we say, whoosh, this is a little bit long, it drags in places, this character. Let's talk about how you feel about revising it. And Priyanka was incredibly responsive, not just to revising one draft, but in my notes, I think she revised 4 separate drafts with us over a period from 2016 to 2018. Isn't that right? So we started working together in February of 2018, and we did a little bit of work, if I recall, editorially. It came in, Priyanka was saying her first draft was 605 pages. When it arrived at the agency, it was 539 pages. I mean, double space, that's about 173,000 words. That's a lot. And there were places where it felt a little draggy. I'm not a great line editor, but I do respond very much to pacing. And I know for sure when something is lagging. So we did a little bit of editing, and I knew there was too much there, but I thought that everything was so valuable that to take anything away before submitting to an editor would be a shame. And I didn't want to make the choice of which wonderful thing should be cut away. And so there are times where I know something is way too long, but I don't want to make the choice that an individual editor might make as to what needs to be kept and what needs to be taken away. And when I send it to an editor, I acknowledge this is so long, but I want you to decide what you love and what you don't love. And what's interesting is you could send it to many editors and get many different opinions as to what to keep and what not. So it usually confirms that it's better that we not cut back too much editorially prior to submitting it.
And I agreed with that whole, like all the way up into doing it. I really agreed with every choice that we made in terms of how to revise it and how much to revise it and when. And I will point out to folks out there, I've gotten this question in interviews in terms of the book in its current state is quite long. And in the state that I submitted it, it was even longer. And did I think anything of that as a debut writer? Because it's historically really difficult to place a long book. And quite frankly, I was just 1,000% ignorant. I really, really thought this is a book that I have taken a critical eye to, and I feel like it's as good as what I have seen sold in bookstores. So maybe let's give it a shot. I didn't even think about length at all. Knowing what I know now, I would definitely maybe make a different choice and try to do a bit more editing on my own. But Lee kind of hinted in terms of drafts, the first round and the book was on submission for 2 years. The first round of submissions we did was after an initial line edit that I got to do with Lee. And also she mentioned Alana Masad, who's an incredible novelist in her own right. She has a book out called All My Mother's Lovers. So that was one round of edits that we did. And after getting what seemed to me, Lee, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong, really, really similar responses in terms of lovely writing, love the visual, just can't make the push to acquire it. We weren't really getting any concrete reason as to why. We collectively, as a group of 3, decided to go back and do even more wholesale revision. And that revision that I worked on, the majority with Alana, was a lot of consolidating. This book has a lot of plot lines and a lot of characters. In its earliest incarnations, it had maybe double. So a lot of it was taking characters out, or like taking 3 characters and, consolidating them into one and doing that kind of work. And it was all work that I think really needed to happen. And then we went out on the second round of submissions. And I don't know, Lee, if you want to talk a bit about that.
Usually what I say to authors also about sort of how much to edit on the first rounds is, let's hear back from a few people that we really trust and see if there's a consensus in the response. You're saying you didn't think there was a consensus, and I was rereading the responses. There was a consensus in pacing and lagging, and I was drawn in immediately, and then I lost interest. And I think it was because there were so many characters and so many plot points that I didn't know where to focus, especially with the characters. We got a lot of that. Like, I didn't know who to root for because I was so distracted by all the characters. And so we sort of did get a consensus that round, and it was pacing and sort of character. And that's what you and Alana did. And we addressed that, and we sent, I don't know if you want these details, but we sent it to a lot of editors, excellent editors. And so then I think you worked on it for, let's see, another year after we had gotten the first set of, how many responses? I don't know. But 13 responses was the first submission. Then in March 2016, then the second submission was May 2016. So you edited for a few months. Then we sent it to 8 publishers, and they all passed, saying all said similar things throughout the time. And it was really frustrating because it was the kind of responses that are, we love it, she's an amazing writer, this is an amazing story, but, and there weren't a lot of buts except for, the length and the pacing. And that was really discouraging, acknowledging what an amazing writer you were, what a fascinating story you had chosen to tell. And no, we can't. We got that a lot. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, we did. I think my favorite was always like, well, we don't want this one, but let us know when Priyanka writes another book. And I'm like, yeah, okay, we'll get in touch in like another 10 years while I do that, while I pick up the pieces of my life. But to kind of to fast forward a bit through it. So we did all of that. And I have to tell everybody out there, just again, the importance of having a really great relationship with an agent who really vibes with you is that, of course, it's incredibly discouraging when you have spent so much time on a book of this scope. And I wasn't writing anything else because I'm somebody who gets really easily distracted. So I made a very concerted effort. This was the only thing I was going to write. So I didn't even have anything to fall back on in terms of my writing. So of course, it's very disappointing when you hear that kind of response, but I could never completely descend into despair because in the back of my mind, I always had the thought, well, if somebody of Lee Feldman's caliber thinks the book is good, then there has to be something redeeming about it. It's not me and it's not the writing. So just having somebody in your corner who's not your mom is really, really important, I would say. And it just really solidified the faith and the trust that I had in her.
Well, Alana and I also felt very passionately all through the submission process, which we don't always, sometimes we sort of lose a little bit hope and say, I guess people are right. We thought editors not buying this were idiots. Like, what are you thinking? This is an amazing book. What's wrong with you that you can't see that? So Alana and I never lost our enthusiasm for it, ever. And we often don't say, what is wrong with these editors? But we felt that every single round that we submitted. Like, this is not us. We know this is an amazing book. There's something wrong with everyone else, or there's something wrong with the publishing industry. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and the two of you made me feel that. And again, that was something that I needed. It was comfort that I needed. So we did that submission process. We even went so far as to hire a freelance outside editor, somebody who had worked for one of the big five, to just say, look, can you look at the manuscript and just tell us why people are saying no? We just want to know why. Like, is it fixable? And the response that we got out of that was, I don't know. I guess it was so, but it didn't feel like the suggestion was essentially to change the book at its core in terms of who is telling the story. And I think after that point, Lee, one thing that I'm always thankful for is that we did have a conversation, whether it was on the phone or email, or it might have been both, about I was ready to go back and do another revision. And you kind of stopped me and was like, I think we need to just put this book aside for now. I think you need to kind of just start just thinking about something else, about a different project. And I think that was really, it was wise, because I did need somebody outside to just say, you did try your best. We tried our best collectively. We really, really did. And for whatever reason, it's not happening. It's not anybody's fault, but you can't just keep being at a stasis at this point. So it was good for me to be able to hear that and have somebody tell me that on the outside. So that conversation, I think, probably happened around February 2018. And then in May 2018, I was on a creative writing listserv, and I happened to get an email advertising the Restless Books Prize for New Immigrant Writing. And this is a prize that my publisher puts out every single year. They alternate between asking for fiction and nonfiction. And the prize was $10,000 in publication. And I thought to myself, book is all ready to go. We don't have anybody else who's interested, but more importantly than all of that, I just need to tick this off my list as something that I tried, so that in a decade, I won't feel any regret about this process at all. I will know that I knocked on every single door. So I consulted with Lee about it. She took a look at it and she basically said, go ahead and let's just see what happens. So I threw my hat in the ring. That was in May. A couple months later, over the summer, I got an email that I was a finalist. I didn't even bother telling Lee about that email because I was like, well, I'm not going to win. And this is, I've come really close before, and why bother her? She's really busy. So I didn't even say anything about it to her. And then in September, I got an email that I had won. And needless to say, I did tell Lee when I got that email. I think I might have called her like frantically to be like, just incredibly life-changing. And again, another point in time where it was invaluable having her at my side, because then this was another step of the process to navigate. And to back up a little bit, I just want to tell folks that Lee and I discussed this, and we thought it was really important just to tell the story truthfully and honestly of how the book got published, because you can have a really seasoned rock star agent like I do, and you can do all of the right things and have a really good manuscript. And sometimes it's just not going to happen. And that's something that we certainly experienced. And it was not something that I would have ever expected prior to finding an agent. I certainly was under the impression that you have a great story, get a great agent, it's all gravy from there. It's going to happen no matter what. So it was a really good learning lesson for me in that sense. So I don't know, to pass it on to both Lee and to Nathan now in terms of just the Restless Books Prize and acquiring the book and that whole process.
Nathan?
Unmuting. By the way, thanks, Johnny. Thanks to the Authors Guild for hosting us. I can tell you a little bit about the prize. First, I just want to echo something Lee said about just the world of the novel and how instantly captivating it was, and how much we felt like we were learning as we read it. You know, this world of death hostels in Benares, India, was so vividly rendered and so convincing in all its details and just fascinating. And, you know, early on as part of the discussion process in the prize, you know, part of the conversation was, well, the book probably needs some editing, but we believe in it passionately enough that we want to put in that editorial work. So we do run this prize annually. It started in 2016. Priyanka was the second fiction winner for the prize. And it's on the publishing side, if there are people who are working on the publishing side or interested in that world, the invention of this prize has been one of the best things we've ever done at Restless Books. It just creates its own kind of ecosystem of publishing. And it's a way to get the word out about books when you can stick a label that says winner of the XYZ prize on the cover. It just totally increases your chances of getting noticed by reviewers, by booksellers, librarians, etc. And it's just such a lovely way to highlight writers' work who are coming from a particular angle, in this case, immigrant writing. And so I was not a judge for the prize. I help administrate the prize. And sometimes I kind of coordinate the judges' meetings and moderate that discussion. But I don't put my thumb on the scale and say, I really think we should publish this book and not that book. The Restless staff is the first line of readers. We get about 200 submissions a year. So we do all collectively read. We get at least 2 readers for every submission that comes our way. And then the staff together kind of tries to hone down a list of about 10 books that we think are most worthy of the judges' consideration. And then we pass that along to the judges. In the year that Priyanka won, the wonderful author Thea Obret was a judge, in addition to our publisher Elon Stavins, who is always one of the judges as well. And so editorially, you know, once the book wins, you know, it's passed on to the editorial team, and in this case, it was me. And it was like at that point, okay, here we go. Let's dive in and see what we can do. And it was a really wonderful, very in-depth, detailed editorial process with Priyanka. I definitely noticed some of that kind of overabundant story that created a sense of a slack tension at certain moments in the story. But it was really wonderful working with Priyanka because she was totally game for treating the book like a puzzle. Like, how do we take all these pieces that are here and make it the best that it can be? I was looking back through my folder of editorial notes and different versions of the drafts and things, and I was kind of shocked to remember that there are over 40 documents in that folder, many different versions of the book. You know, some of them consisted of just, you know, kind of structural notes, like how do we maybe restructure certain sections of the book so that they happen more dramatically, so that something that happens on page 400 is dramatically set up on page 75, so that when you get to page 400, it comes as more of a revelation and as more of an aha moment. And that kind of work to me is what is the most fun about editing, where you can really figure out how to get to the heart of a book and help it to get to a form that's going to be the most engaging and successful and true to what the book is trying to accomplish.
So with those like 40 some odd documents, Nathan, to be fair, a lot of those are probably me sending you something at midnight and then 5 minutes later being like, no, don't use that one. Use this one instead. That I just like rehauled massively in the 5 minutes since I sent you the last one.
There's a little of that. Sure.
Nathan was very, very patient with me, super patient. But I have to say, this was my first book. I had never worked with an editor before. You know, I had had the privilege of working with Lee and with Alana. But, you know, and as Lee explained earlier, with that, you're kind of a little more careful with your edits because you want to be mindful of the future editor that you work with in terms of what they might want to do. So this experience was just so thrilling on so many ways, because when you're working on something by yourself for 6 to 7 years and there's nobody to talk to, and suddenly you have somebody to talk to, and there's somebody on the other end who's excited about it and who has ideas about it, and you're completely tapped out, but this other person knows what to do. And it was it made working on the book fun again, which was a really, really key part of the process when I had been working on it for so long and was really just sick of certain sections that had been there from the beginning. But having it be fun made it possible because it was a lot of work. The book is divided up into 5 parts. I think I rewrote entirely that second part, which is definitely the one that a lot of that probably had the most lagging and pacing issues. But Nathan, you were the only one who knew what to do with it. Like nobody else knew what to do with it. And the other thing that Nathan was key with was just having this eye with like being able to see that larger picture, because that gave me the freedom to kind of make a bulleted list of like in the scenes, what did I need to do? What new scenes did I need to make? What did I need to cut out, etc. Knowing that Nathan had my back in terms of like lifting out the story once I did all of that work. I don't know that I could have done that on my own, or if I did do it on my own, it probably would have taken another 10 years. Because it's really hard when you've written something that long and epic to be able to see it. You just kind of get blind to it after a while. But Lee, you had asked me for word counts because you were curious about where it started and where it went. So I think like that version that I sent to you was 173,000 words.
Right.
The one that I submitted to the Restless contest was 124,000 words. So we cut out 50,000 words. And then after working with Nathan, it bumped back up to 145,000 words. So still like trimmer, but definitely tighter, way more engrossing than what
I think we definitely cut at least another 50,000 words though,
yes.
And then added back a brand new, 75 odd thousand.
Well, we cut a lot of the boring bits. We cut all the boring bits, and then we added only interesting bits. That's all we did.
If you're writing and you're sick of looking at a particular character or a particular section of the book, that's a sign that maybe there's something in there that's not working or it's not necessary.
And I will also add, nothing gets past Nathan, because as a writer, I do have a pretty good instinct in terms of, I think I'm getting away with this, but let's just keep going and maybe nobody will notice but me, and maybe we'll be okay, and maybe I won't have to do the work. Nathan notices everything. So he noticed all of the things. And for me, that's enough. I just need one outside person to tell me that they've noticed something, and then I have to go fix it. And so it was also really good to have that, to be like, well, that's kind of validating my own instinct about things. If Nathan thought it wasn't working, well, you initially thought it wasn't working, so you probably should have just fixed it to begin with and then called it a day. So that was the editorial process. From here, we could probably go into the fun part, which is when the book came out, and everything that went into it in terms of the cover and publicity and the pandemic. We should talk about the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
This book was originally supposed to be released in June 2020. Yay! We had, I think in March, Nathan, you emailed Lee and I to be like, yeah, the world is changing. We need to figure this out. And it was a very, I think, prophetic almost decision where you were like, I think we need to release it the following February. which when I saw that at first, I was like, because I didn't really think that, I was like many of those mole people who are like, the pandemic will be done in a couple of months and then we'll all be fine. So it was good to have you say that, and you know, outlined very great reasons for why we did that. So the book ended up being released in February. But yeah, I guess we could talk about any of the marketing stuff associated with it and publicity.
Yeah, and then in February, the pandemic was still happening. But fingers crossed, when the paperback comes out in March 2022, it will be just a fond memory. But yeah, I have a unique role at Restless where I'm overseeing both editorial and marketing. As a quick side note, I have a different approach to marketing than a lot of other, or we at Restless do, than to a lot of bigger corporate publishers, where you have these separate departments. You know, there's the editorial department and there's a wall, and then there's the marketing department, and then there's a wall, and then there is the publicity department, and you kind of work together, but you're not necessarily all having the same conversation at the same time. I think that marketing, to be effective, I think that the marketing team needs to know a book as intimately as the editors do. The marketing conversation should start like as soon as the book is acquired and editors start working on it. Easy in my case when I'm both the marketer and the editor of the book, but in general, you know, the authors themselves are often our greatest weapon and tool in our arsenal when it comes to marketing. We have a very in-depth author questionnaire that we have our authors fill out so we can start to brainstorm together. What are the different avenues and audiences that we can pursue with this book? What are some creative ways we could try to reach them? And then Priyanka mentioned that she is an avid knitter, maybe even a knitter before a writer at certain points. And it turned out that, you know, I learned a lot about how completely avid the knitting community is. And, you know, in some ways, it's a much more robust world than the publishing industry. And we just we took one of the key things we did for marketing the book is that we brought Priyanka to a thing called Winter Institute, which is an annual conference of booksellers from all around the country. Hundreds of booksellers come. And it was the pandemic on the way. You know, we took you, Priyanka, to Winter Institute, I think, in January of 2020 that we did?
It was 2020.
So right before the pandemic, you know, thinking that the book was going to be released 5 months later, and introduced you to all sorts of booksellers. And I remember in the galley signing line, people were coming up to you and you were discovering, you had this radar for knitters. Like, I think you discovered like 15 different people who were avid knitters, and they were so excited that you had that connection. And then we ended up doing kind of a knitting promotion for the book. You should tell us about the sweater.
We did. Oh, so it's funny. My laptop is set up on like a tub of knitting, including the sweater that I made. But yeah, no, I kind of went crazy because, you know, knitters, not the stereotype, but knitters are very often readers. And they're always the nicest people. And Lee's wearing a thing that I made that I knitted for her. But yeah, I had seen before where a high profile author had done a knitting collaboration where she partnered with this yarn company, and they came out with like custom dyed yarn packs, like to match your book cover. And I was like, well, that's super cool. What could I do? And I ended up contacting a knitting designer who's based in India named Nidhi Kansal. She's incredibly talented. And I sent her a galley of the book, and I was like, I'd love for you to just create a pattern that's inspired by the book. And actually, it's right. I'm going to go grab it really quick.
That's really neat. I remember last year, Silvia Moreno Garcia said she did a lipstick color in conjunction with the book. These are creative ideas.
They're fun. Yeah. So Nidhi ended up, she designed this shawl. I sent her this yarn. It's like a silk yarn, but it's this green color. And there's a motif in the novel of a green parrot that kind of flits in and out of the book. And so, and the color of that parrot in India is exactly this green color. So she designed this incredible shawl to go around with it. She took beautiful photography of the shawl with the book, because she's in India, both the India edition and the American edition. And we just released it. It was just a fun thing to do in conjunction with the book. Restless Books was great in terms of sponsoring giveaways. So we did on Instagram and on Facebook just giveaways where folks could win like a pattern, the yarn, and the book, like all signed and everything. And it was just a lot of fun. And for me, it just felt natural and organic. Like it wasn't a forced promotional thing because I am such an obsessive knitter. And I don't have it handy, but I even knitted a sweater to match my book cover as well, because again, what else am I going to do? I'm not going to write another book. So yeah, it was just fun to be able to incorporate that in a really creative way that spoke to me, and Restless was so into it as well. And I think that's what made it fun too. And poor Nathan had to hear me talk about yarn and knitting and knitters and patterns and other things like ad nauseum. At this point, I don't understand why he doesn't just jump on the bandwagon and become a knitter. One day we will get you there. But yeah, that was just one of the creative things that we did with it. Also, and I would say this is purely, I think, because of you, Nathan, and your connections probably, I had a lot of opportunities to write pieces leading up to the book's publication. So for places like Electric Lit and, getting to do like various interviews with podcasts and stuff, and being able to do that kind of lead up marketing, was not something I would have been able to do on my own, I don't think, because I didn't have any of those connections. But those were also really fun ways to just show people what I could do as a writer in a limited expanse, and then perhaps get them interested enough into actually looking at the book as a whole.
Definitely. And we were also helped by my colleague, Christine, who worked with me in marketing on the book. And turns out Christine is also a knitter. So,
well, it turns out I think all the women at Restless are knitters. They just didn't tell me.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, Nathan, how you came up with that gorgeous jacket art? Because it really is one of my favorites. And a lot of people associate small presses or independent presses with shitty or small jacket art. This is not. This is a beautiful, beautiful, special jacket art. And the paperback has a totally different design, different coloration, and it's equally absolutely gorgeous. And you would never see it on a table in a bookstore and be like, small press, I'm not going to buy that. This is something that really gets how big this book is in scope. And it's a beautiful work of art, actually, speaking of knitting, and I can understand why you would make a sweater out of it. But that, talk a little bit about the jacket art, because I think that's so important a piece of it, even though most people don't forget, are seeing it in thumbnails, not as a on the table in the bookstore, sadly. But
well, Priyanka sent me a whole folder of images that she was either inspired by when writing the book or felt spoke to the themes of the book. And one of them in particular, the image that ended up on both the hardcover and the paperback, was just so evocative and cool. And so we just started playing around with different ways that we could incorporate that image into a jacket. And so there it is. So that, yeah, the image is.
So your lighting's better.
Yeah.
There's those boatmen. Yeah, I had found that in the Washington Post. They used to do a series in the A section where they would just do images around the world. And I think this was maybe in year 3 or 4 of writing the book where I saw that. And it's not in Benares, it's on Dal Lake, I think, which is, I think, closer to, I think it's in Srinagar. So it's like north India.
Can you hold it up again, please?
Yeah, oh, of course. But it just immediately spoke to me in so many different ways. So it's definitely one of the ones that I sent to Nathan. But Nathan, you were the one to come up with this cool idea of positioning it in a different way. I think first out of necessity, because it wouldn't fit any other way, but then it just ended up looking so cool. I loved it.
I have to confess, and I think I've confessed this before, I don't think I've been keeping it a secret, but it was my partner, Courtney Hodel, who is also a book editor. She is the director of literary programs for the Whiting Foundation and runs the Whiting Writers Awards. She said, just flip it vertical. It's like, oh my God, how cool. Let's try that.
She also has an amazing aesthetic sensibility.
He does. Well, I've been giving you props all this time for nothing. Thanks for just like revealing that to me.
Well, I did come up with the recoloring idea, and then we, you actually also, you know, this is why we rely on authors so much to be a part of every step of the process. Like we wanted to do some original lettering for the type on the cover, and you, I think, sent me the website of this guy. What was his name?
Patrick Knowles. Yeah.
Patrick Knowles.
Yeah.
And we approached him and said, would you be interested in doing the lettering for this jacket? And
show that to people once again. And also, and I have to tell folks, I had the impression going in that, here's a better one of the lettering. I had the impression that the publisher just decided everything about the cover, that if I was lucky, maybe I'd get to see a couple of comps and express an opinion, but perhaps that opinion would not really be taken into account. So it really blew me away that Restless Nathan was emailing me every step of the way, and he was including Lee in a lot of those steps as well. He just genuinely wanted my opinion. And at first, with a lot of the comps, I'd be like, oh, well, you know, this is good, but if you want it to do this or that. And I gradually started understanding that he's actually listening to me. Like he actually wants to know my opinion, and he's responding to it. And he's, you know, getting, you know, further iterations created based on my feedback. So that was just a really cool part of the process that I was not expecting. To have this photo that I already had incorporated, then to just find this letterist, Patrick Knowles, online, and then to find out that he was game to do this custom lettering. That was super cool. Everything from like deciding like the thread that kind of binds the pages. I got to pick out the color. I got to pick out the color of like the hardcover case, and then like the foil lettering that goes inside. Just so super cool, because I think as a writer, I'd never, like, I love physical books. I love the aesthetics of a book, but I had never dreamed that I would get to be able to pick any of that. I just assumed it would just happen, and here you go, here's your book, and this is what we decided on. So it was really cool to be able to just, you know, be an equal party to that as well.
Yeah, I want to see if I can I, Johnny, can I share my screen?
Yes, you can.
Okay, I just wanted to show you the paperback jacket on my screen to see how we kind of reconceive the same image in a totally different way. So let me.
And there was nothing that Priyanka was asked to choose that wasn't sort of a fun chance.
Yeah, so we thought, let's take it in a different direction color-wise. Let's, you know, make it pop, grab people's attention. So, and for this round, it was our production manager who actually came up with the coloring, and also the title type and the different. We looked at a lot of different combinations for the title color.
Yeah, that was all Sarah, and I love it. And anybody who knows me, especially as a knitter, I'm such a neon person. So this cover is like literally like if somebody was like, take Priyanka and make her into a book cover. It's just like everything that my dreams are made of. I'm so excited to see it in real life.
It's unusual that a book has two winner jackets, a hardcover and a paperback. Usually one is preferred and but these are two very beautiful pieces of art.
Very different and yet connected, because that same photo is used in both of them.
Yeah.
So we're at the 15-minute mark. Johnny, I don't know if we want to go ahead and take any questions that might be in the audience.
Yeah, you've answered so many questions, but such a great story about this book, and it's good to hear an unusual path to publication. I guess real quick, just to go back to you, Lee, do you have any advice for writers who are querying agents right now?
My advice, which was what I was talking about before, is you have to look at first of all, you have to be a passionate reader. I mean, when I get a query from someone who says, I never read a book that I thought I could write, but it's like, yeah, I can do surgery in my dreams. It's just silly. So really look at your bookshelf, really think about what book you're writing and know what it's comparable to. I mean, if I say to an author, tell me what your book reminds you of that you've read previously, and they're like, oh, it's too special for that. I don't know, it just defies genre. You're just like, no, it can't defy genre. It's been defied. Genres have been defied. So have an idea of who you're writing for, what you're writing about, and that there are comparisons. So you can say, like, my novel is like The City of Good Death meets, I don't know, Blade Runner. Okay. And also to do your homework and say, Lee, I know you love books that are similar to Blade Runner and City of Good Death. So would you be interested? Just do your homework and be a reader. Be someone who's read. And also you'll notice something very, very important from Priyanka's story. She worked on this for years and years. She didn't write it in 6 months. She didn't edit it for 6 months. Like, this was years. So when someone comes to me and says, I've been working on my novel for 2 months, it's like, you don't even know what it takes, So there are a few things that are really important to me to show that you're a writer and that this is something you're committed to, and that you have a full-time job and you've been writing every night for 8 years. Like, that's not unusual. So that's what I would say. As far as the market goes, is that what you're asking, or just how to approach an agent?
Oh, that's great. I mean, so you're really interested in the book. Do you think of it as, are you interested in knowing that the author has more books in them, like you're looking in the long term, or are you just laser focused on the book that's submitted?
I mean, it's nice to know that they're interested in working on more than just this book, but a lot of the books like this that I represent take so much energy and so much time that it can take 10 years for them to write their next book. So yes, it's nice if they have an idea, and every editor that I've submitted to will say, and what's her next book about? But that's not what's important. Only the substance of this particular book at a time.
Nathan, I know this book won a prize, but in general, do you put much weight on social media followings and things like that when you're considering submissions?
For us at Restless, we publish mostly international literature. About 70% of it is in translation. If the author can speak English, it's a huge upside for us, let alone have, 10,000, 100,000 followers on Twitter. It's definitely an upside when you get it, but it's not something that we rely on. And then I often try to, if an author is interested in, figuring out social media, starting an account, I think, Priyanka, you really took Instagram to heart and started to really post actively and kind of build more of a community and a following there.
Yeah. I mean, because prior to that, like I had Instagram for years, but it was mostly me just posting pictures of snacks and things that I wanted to be eating.
It's also valuable content. Yeah.
It's very, very valuable. I mean, come on, give the people what they want. But you and I had a very valuable conversation even before we started editing, where I just wanted to get a jump start on it. Because one thing I am very cognizant with social media, it's pretty apparent to me when folks are like, I just created an account to just promote this thing, and that's it. That's fine. That's totally fine. But for me, I did want it to be like an authentic experience. And Instagram, I'm a visual person, and personally, I enjoy using it. So it was something that I already had, but I had asked you about Twitter, about whether you felt like I should join Twitter or not. And you were kind of like, what I really appreciated, because again, I had this preconceived notion that a publisher is going to be like, do everything, do all the things and be on top of all the things all the time. But Nathan, you were super cool about it and being like, just try it out if you want to and just see if it works. And I ended up not trying it out because I just didn't want to. And for me, like, I only have the bandwidth to do one thing. And I had already been doing Instagram. And because there's a huge Instagram following for knitters, I had already been doing it in that capacity. So it just felt as a natural place for me to be able to continue doing it in that vein too.
Mm-hmm. Priyanka, a lot of people are interested in hearing about this line editing that went on. Was that a surprise? Was that something you planned on doing, or that was a decision you and Lee made?
So the line editing I fully expected edits to happen. I never thought at a certain point that, oh, this book is pristine. It needs no changes at all. Just publish it as it is. Because again, I mentioned that feeling of certain places being, I'm not so sure about that. Don't know if that's going to fly. Let's just go ahead and see what happens. So I had that niggling feeling, and I also knew, where I needed help. And so it was nice in all of these steps of the process to have, Lee, and to have Alana, and then to have Nathan, for me to go back to them and be like, I'm really not sure about this spot. What do you all think? And then also having somebody point out all of these other things that I perhaps would not have caught on my own soon enough in the process. So none of that was a surprise to me. And again, when you're working on something for as long as I did and in such a concentrated fashion, frankly, I was grateful and thankful to have the attention, because you're by yourself. Nobody really cares about it because nobody knows about it. And suddenly you have this team of people who do really care about it, and they're really enthusiastic. And it's then not your book anymore. And I say that in a good way. Like, a lot of people out there might be like, oh God, it's not your book. Like, they're taking it away and they're ruining your baby. No, I've always had a sense that a book goes through incarnations. I had the book that I wrote that was 600 pages, and that was the book I wrote for me. Then the book took on a life of its own with Lee and Alana, and it was the book that I had with them. And then finally, the book took on its final incarnation with Nathan. And that is the book that needed to go out to a wider audience. The other incarnations would not have worked. So thinking about it in that way, I never had a moment of coming to terms with it and being like, oh crap, we got to do edits. These people don't get me. That really has a lot to do with it. I always felt everybody here on this screen got me. So it made it easy. They were people I trusted.
So someone just asked, I'm struggling to understand how having an agent was beneficial to this process of publication. Yeah, like, to be clear, it's that Lee helped her get the book ready. Even
I didn't sell it.
The prize.
The irony is that you get an agent, and yes, all this complimentary, she's so great, she's so successful, and I failed to sell it. I failed to sell it even to, I submitted to, at the end, smaller presses, but did I submit it to Restless Books prize? No, I didn't. So, I failed, but it was, as I said, a process that I might have cut shorter if it was another book, because I might have been convinced along the way that other people were right and my instincts in this case were wrong, but I never felt that way. I never felt that way.
Well, and I really have to stress here, I'm really, really protective of Lee in this sense. Like, so when she says she failed, I totally disagree. I don't think Lee failed. I think publishers failed. And I never toot my own horn, but quite frankly, the response that I have heard from readers on Instagram, from India, from America, from everywhere, it's been selected for various prizes. People seem to like it and have a good response to it. Nothing about it changed. That version that Lee submitted out to publishers was exactly the same as the version that got submitted out to the contest. So what changed was that we had an audience that believed in the book and had the scope of vision to be able to recognize that a story told with a point of view, which was not the default in the United States of America, was still one worth telling. So that was not a failure of Lee by any means. And sure, Lee did not physically sell the book to a publisher, but the things that she did do for me are like uncountable in terms of, again, having that moral support. When that contract came in from Restless Books, I didn't know what I was looking at. I had Lee there to read it and like have my back, having a second opinion for, all of these other things that have come down the way. So having an agent is not just about having this body go out and sell the book for you. It means a lot. It's a lot more than that. And I had always envisioned having a relationship with an agent that was a lifelong collaboration. And frankly, that's what I feel like I've gotten, unless Lee decides she doesn't like me at some point and wants to like walk on her own way. But that's what I was in it for, and that's what I've gotten out of it. So it depends, for whoever asked that question. It really depends on what you're looking for and getting out of the relationship.
That's fascinating. Now, people would like to hear more about the film, if there were film rights, other subsidiary rights, how the Indian edition came about. Can you speak to that?
That's Lee and Nathan.
We sent the book out widely to international publishers, and I had a contact, Manasi, Priyanka, how do you say her last name? I don't want to get it wrong.
Manasi Subramaniam.
Yes, at Penguin Random House India, who I had met at a previous London book fair and just chatted to about Restless in general. And then when we had this book ready, I sent it to her and said, I think you might really like this. Check it out, see what you think. And she loved it. And also, an interesting side note here, Priyanka, I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but the remarkable thing to me about that was that you had never been to Benares at the time. And the fact that this really noteworthy Indian publisher had thought, this is a great book, we're going to publish it. Bravo to you for fooling them.
But I'll add, we're not fooling them. We're inviting them into my web of deception. I will add to that though, Nathan. Lee actually submitted the book to Penguin Random House India. She didn't submit it to Mansi, she submitted it to someone else. Right. And they passed on it. So
I submitted it separately from US publishers. I submitted it to Canadian publishers. I submitted it separately to British publishers. And I submitted it separately directly to Indian publishers.
Yeah. So it's just.
So my failure was very broad. Oh, I'm not allowed to use that term.
No, you're not allowed to use that term.
No, but
it's just funny to me that it was, again, same book in many, many ways. And yet it was just the fact that it was being published in the United States of America, I think was what convinced them at that time, and obviously two different people read it, but, it's just always funny to me that they said no. And then suddenly they turned around and they said yes. And it was, I don't know what the difference was. Very thankful, like no matter what, very, very thankful, but just putting that out there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then also, Johnny, you had asked about film rights, etc. rights. I don't know if we want to talk about.
They're available. If anyone has a connection to Netflix, get in touch.
You can be in touch with me directly.
Great. Have you hit the road to do in-person events more recently?
I got to do the Brooklyn Book Festival. That was my very first in-person event since the book has been published. And that was a lot of fun to just be able to have a live audience. It was a panel that I got to do with the authors, Tom Lynn and Dariel Suarez, and it was moderated by CJ Farley from the Wall Street Journal. And it was just, it was so much fun to actually have that. What I really missed about it was the book signing line and just being able to connect with people, because Nathan mentioned Winter Institute. That was the only other event I gotten to do. And that was with galleys, it was with booksellers. So it was just introducing them to the book and seeing if they wanted to sell it. And we had a great turnout for that. And it just really turned me on to how fun a book signing line could be, because I do really well, I think, with people in a one-on-one interaction. I just go into overdrive when there's more than 2 or 3 people. There's just too much stimulation and I can't focus. So it was really cool to be able to do that. That being said, with a pandemic and doing all of these types of Zoom events has been absolutely my jam. It's just the perfect way to do it. And it has saved me time and money because I still work a full-time job. So for example, this event that I'm doing right now, this is my lunch break. As soon as I log off, I'm going back to work. I mean, like, I'm staying in the same physical space, but like, you know, I got work emails to check and I got, you know, stuff I need to do. And if I had to do physical events, I wouldn't be able to do that. I'd have to take time off from my job. I'd have to spend money to like get there and go back and for lodging and etc. And most publishers don't pay for book tours in that sense. It's a lot of money you have to put out yourself. And often the return is very little. You might get like 4 or 5 people in the bookstore. So being able to do these events, it's enabled me to do it in these wide geographic swaths. I've been able to do a lot of events in India, which has been super, super cool. I couldn't have done that otherwise. And it's just enabled me to connect with a lot more people than I would have in a physical bookstore. Although we love our independent bookstores, and they've all the events that I've done have always been in partnership with independent bookstores.
That's great. Well, your lunch hour is up, unfortunately, so we'll call it there. But you know, we promise candid discussions in the series, and our audience really appreciates everything you've shared today. So thank you, Priyanka, Lee, and Nathan for joining us. Thanks to our audience, and we hope to see you at future events. Again, we have another one of these on Friday and many more coming up. So stay in touch.
This has
Thanks,
been
everybody.
fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.